Hello and welcome to Threadpainting Behind the Scenes. I'm Kate, and in today's episode, I'm sharing the behind the scenes process of creating my RUPAUL at the Roast thread painting. Let's go behind the scenes. If you're a super fan of RuPaul's Drag Race like me, you'll probably instantly recognize the reference photo I used to create this embroidery. But in case you're a casual fan or unfamiliar, this is a screenshot taken during the season 13 episode of Drag Race, Nice Girls Roast, where one of the queens makes a joke at RuPaul's expense. This pose is her perfect reaction. The moment was so iconic and unexpected from Ru, I knew immediately I had to capture it in thread for my ongoing pop culture portraits series. I started the process of creating this thread painting by tracing the reference photo on my iPad in Procreate. Then I moved the file into Photoshop and adjusted the size for my pattern. I used a technique that I learned from Stitching Sabbatical on YouTube, where you stick your fabric to the adhesive part of a full-page label and print the pattern directly on the fabric. I will link that video of the tutorial that I used by Stitching Sabbatical in the description. Once I printed out my pattern, I removed the fabric from the label paper, hooped it, and began stitching Ru's face. I always start my portraits with the eyes for a few reasons. First, stitching the eyes gives me an opportunity to solidify the spacing of the facial features in the portrait. And secondly, they always use what I think are the two most important thread colors in any embroidery I create, which are black and white. Embroidering faces is kind of like contouring the face. You place the shadows and highlights with the darkest and lightest colors you'll be using first before moving on to blending everything together. And in my case, to create the most realism, I use black and white to start this process. After the eyes, I continue working on the other major features of the face that will have white or highlights like the teeth, bridge of the nose, and the top of the forehead. I then choose about 3 to 4 thread colors to blend these highlights and shadows together on the face, making sure to have the light, medium, and dark colors that I can use to create depth and dimension in different areas. Throughout the blending process, I'll jump around the face using black thread to define features. And once the features are solidly in place and I've achieved the realism and depth that I'm looking for, I move on to another section of the portrait. I like to give myself some time away from working on the face once I think it's done, so that I can come back later and tweak things as needed. This happens in every portrait I create to some extent, so I don't stress about it, and I get excited about working on the next section before I circle back to this one. When working on RuPaul's fabulous wig, I chose a medium orange color to lay as one of the darker shadow colors first, following with a super pale yellow color all over as the main highlight. And then I went through and shaded again with a medium golden color. Since drag queens are larger than life and everything they do has a little extra shine, I used satin white thread to act as an additional highlight in the hair, which looks amazing. I even used a little bit of it on the very top of RuPaul's cheek for the makeup highlight. I then blended everything together with a bright yellow color before moving on to the next section. The hands are arguably what makes this portrait so iconic in the first place. Very rare to see Ru flipping off one of her queens. I love stitching hands, and so it was a big part of why I chose this photo to recreate in thread. I followed a similar process as I did with the face, laying a base foundation of a lighter color and then coming in with lighter and darker tones to define the fingers, hands, and arms. At this stage of the portrait, I really get into a flow since I already have my colors chosen and I've stitched the entire face, which is the hardest part, so I get to just enjoy the process. Everything starts coming together in my mind, And all of a sudden, I'm done stitching the neck, ears, I'm already moving on to the second hand. By this point, I know exactly what I'm doing. It's just a race to the finish so that I can move on to finishing touches for the portrait. Here, I go back through Rue's hair and add in some definition with a dark brown color. I didn't film the process of stitching Rue's outfit or earrings, but once everything was complete and I knew that I was done stitching the face, I wanted to add some color to make it pop. I decided to finish the embroidery with a satin stitch around the portrait in a hot pink color that corresponds with the reference photo. I then went searching through my stash of art supplies and found a 5x5 inch canvas along with the perfect scrap of black and silver patterned faux leather to cover the canvas with and serve as the dynamic backdrop. I added some fray check around the satin stitches along the edge of the portrait to give it a little bit more stability, and then trimmed very closely around the portrait. Finally, I used Heat and Bond iron-on adhesive to mount the finished portrait onto the faux leather fabric-covered canvas. The entire process took about 40 hours, and I'm so happy with how the finished portrait turned out. I think I captured the essence of this moment in Drag Race HERstory, and it's one of my favorite portraits I've ever created. The serendipity of having the perfect fabric scrap from years ago in my stash to complete the look is what really makes it for me. I've created over 20 pop culture portraits in my embroidery journey so far, but this is the first time I've documented the process in this way. I really enjoyed it, and I hope to make more videos like this in the future. I wonder who I'll stitch next. Feel free to leave suggestions for future thread painted portraits in the comments or any questions you may have. Thank you for spending time with me and learning about the behind the scenes process of stitching RuPaul at the roast. I hope you've enjoyed. I'll see you next time. To support this channel, you can definitely like this video and subscribe. You can also send me a tip on Venmo, the Cashapp, or buy me a coffee. The links to do any of those things are in the description below. You can follow me on Instagram or TikTok at katehughesart. And I just want to thank you so much for your support. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.